Claire stood frozen in the hallway, one palm pressed flat against the wall as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. In her other hand, she gripped a wedding magazine so tightly the glossy pages bent and creased beneath her fingers. The dining room door was slightly ajar, open just enough for voices to drift through. She was not supposed to be home yet. Her marketing meeting had ended early, and she had imagined surprising her family with coffee and pastries, maybe even sharing a laugh before heading back out. Instead, she became the surprise. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel, like the video and tell me where you're watching from today. She'll cover it. Lydia's voice rang out, bright and careless. Just like she paid for my wedding. Her laughter followed, sharp and confident, cutting clean through the air. That's what older sisters are for, Lydia added. Claire's parents laughed with her. Not awkward laughter. Not hesitant. Comfortable laughter. The kind that said this was already settled. We've already told everyone about the combined celebration, Margaret said proudly. It's perfect timing. Richard cleared his throat. 5 years is a real milestone. An anniversary like that deserves just as much attention as a wedding. The magazine slipped from Claire's fingers and landed softly on the carpet. She did not bend to retrieve it. Her body refused to move, her lungs refusing to draw a full breath. The blood rushed to her face, leaving her ears ringing. 5 years of therapy vanished in seconds. 5 years of learning to speak up, to name her worth, to stop apologizing for existing. In its place stood a 10-year-old girl again, watching Lydia unwrap her birthday gifts while adults clapped and praised her for being generous. Claire stepped backward without making a sound. She moved down the hallway, out the front door, and into her car, where she sat gripping her handbag, staring straight ahead. The keys dangled uselessly from her fingers. She didn't turn the ignition. Not yet. First, she needed to make one call. Claire's finger hovered over Ethan's name on her phone. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled, counting the breaths the way her therapist had taught her. On the third breath, she pressed call. Hey, beautiful, Ethan said, answering on the second ring. How was the meeting? They are doing it again, Claire said. Her voice surprised her. It was steady. But this time, I won't let them. 5 years earlier came rushing back with painful clarity. Lydia had announced her engagement at a family dinner, glowing, dramatic, already the center of the room. 2 weeks later, Richard had called Claire into his study. He explained that Mark had lost his job. The wedding budget was suddenly strained. It's temporary, Richard had promised, his hand heavy on Claire's shoulder. Family comes first. Margaret had stood in the doorway, arms crossed. If you really loved your sister, you'd help. Claire had handed over her entire savings account. $15,000. Her education fund. Her future. It's just one semester, Margaret had said when Claire dropped out of college. You can always go back. She never did. Instead, she worked 2 jobs while Lydia floated through wedding fittings and cake tastings. Claire watched her sister walk down the aisle in a dress that cost more than her car. That night, as music filled the reception hall, Claire made herself a promise she had never voiced aloud. Never again. 2 weeks later, Margaret invited them to dinner. Just something casual, she said, though her voice carried that familiar rehearsed tone. The table was set with the good china. Lydia and Mark arrived late. Before anyone touched their plates, Margaret clasped her hands together and smiled. We had the most wonderful idea, she announced. Ethan's hand found Claire's under the table, steady and warm. Margaret beamed. We thought we could combine Claire's wedding with Lydia and Mark's 5th anniversary celebration. Lydia immediately slid a thick folder onto the table. It was color-coded, tabbed, and unmistakably prepared. I already made a list, she said cheerfully. Separate cake, obviously. A special dance. And the colors should match my original wedding for continuity. All eyes turned toward Claire. The silence pressed in on her ears. This was the moment they expected her to nod. To smile. To say yes without thinking. Let me think about it, Claire said instead. The room went still. Margaret's smile froze mid-expression. Richard blinked, clearly thrown off balance. Lydia's mouth opened, then shut again. Think about it. Richard recovered quickly, patting Claire's shoulder. You've always been practical. That's why we know you'll handle the finances. Lydia's eyes filled with tears that looked practiced, controlled. I thought you'd be excited. Margaret shot Claire a warning glance. Keep the peace, it said clearly. She'll come around, Margaret added aloud. passing the potatoes. Claire smiled and nodded, the perfect daughter once more. Ethan squeezed her hand beneath the table, his quiet support grounding her. "I'm sure it will be beautiful," Claire said. The words tasted like ash. That night, Claire stayed behind, claiming she needed to pick up a few things she had left over the years. In Richard's study, the family computer glowed softly as she scrolled through Margaret's emails. She knew she shouldn't be doing this, but Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "Trust your instincts." Her breath caught when she saw it. An email chain titled Vendor Payments, Claire. Margaret had written, "Don't worry about the deposits. Richard and I assured everyone Claire will cover all expenses once contracts are finalized." Claire's hands trembled as she opened more messages. Screenshots. Budgets. Notes labeling payments as bride responsibility. A notification popped up on Margaret's tablet. Claire tapped it and froze. A wedding dress. Not hers. Ordered 3 days ago. Charged to her credit card. Claire texted Ethan one word, bathroom. Their code for emergencies. He called instantly. "What happened?" "They've been planning this for months," Claire said quietly. "Lydia used my credit card to buy another wedding dress." "That's fraud," Ethan said, anger tightening his voice. "There's more." Claire opened her banking app. "Those deposits I couldn't explain last month? They weren't deposits. They were withdrawals mislabeled for wedding expenses." Ethan went silent, then spoke carefully. "My parents got a call last week. Someone claiming to be your wedding coordinator said you wanted a simple ceremony and didn't need their contribution." Everything clicked. Claire noticed a spreadsheet on the desktop titled Wedding Plus Anniversary, Final. She opened it. Her stomach dropped with each tab. Venue, $22,000 catering, $15,000 entertainment, $8,000 flowers, $7,000 photography, $6,000 dresses, $5,000. At the bottom, a total, $63,000. Next to it, in Lydia's unmistakable purple font, Claire's responsibility. Claire sank into Richard's chair. On his desk sat a framed photo from Lydia's wedding. Claire was smiling in it. She remembered signing away her education fund just hours before. She opened the desk drawer and found Margaret's journal. The most recent entry read, "Claire will understand." She always does. A receipt slipped out from between the pages. A $5,000 golf club membership renewal. Dated the same week Richard claimed financial hardship. Claire took screenshots of everything and sent them to herself. The next morning, her phone buzzed at work. A message from Hannah, her oldest friend. "Call me. Lydia just contacted our company claiming she's handling your wedding." Claire stared at the screen, calm settling over her for the first time in days. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. And for the first time, Claire was ready to dismantle it. That evening, Rachel sat at Claire and Ethan's kitchen table, arms folded, expression serious. Rachel had escaped her own controlling family years earlier, and she recognized the signs immediately. "This isn't just Lydia," Rachel said. "Your mother enables it. Your father enforces it. Lydia creates the crisis, and you're expected to solve it." Mrs. Brooks, the elderly neighbor who often joined them for coffee, nodded from her chair. "I've watched this pattern for years," she said gently. "You accommodate, dear. And they depend on it." "Not anymore," Claire said, though her voice wavered. The threats began the next day. Lydia called, dripping sweetness. "Remember how I helped you get that marketing job? Connections matter." Richard hinted at helping with a house down payment. Margaret mentioned family stress and heart issues. That night, Claire made her first move. "I'll need to be the one signing the venue contract," she told them calmly over dinner. The exchanged glances told her everything. At home, she cancelled the fraudulent dress order and changed every password. Lydia called immediately, furious. "You've gained weight anyway. That dress would have looked better on me." Claire cried alone in the bathroom later, gripping the sink as years of pressure poured out in silence. When she looked up, something had changed. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning freedom. The morning after Claire changed her passwords, her phone began vibrating before she even reached her office desk. Lydia's name flashed across the screen, then disappeared, replaced by a string of messages. "You're overreacting. Mom is really upset. You're embarrassing the family." Claire placed her phone face down and opened her laptop, forcing herself to focus on work. But her chest tightened when a new message arrived from Richard. "We need to talk tonight. Face to face." At dinner, The atmosphere was thick and artificial, like a stage set dressed to look warm. Margaret had prepared Claire's favorite meal, the unspoken signal of reconciliation. "You've been distant," Margaret said gently, folding her napkin. "We just want harmony." Claire met her gaze. "Harmony shouldn't cost me everything." Lydia scoffed. "You act like we're stealing from you." Claire didn't respond. She watched Richard carefully. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, the posture he used when he planned to assert authority. "The venue is expecting confirmation," he said. "Rosewood Manor is holding tomorrow afternoon for us." "For you," Claire corrected. Margaret smiled tightly. "You're part of this family." "And I'm part of my own life," Claire said. "Ethan and I agreed on 50 guests and a modest venue." Lydia laughed sharply. "That's ridiculous. You can't host a wedding with 50 people. It's embarrassing." "What's embarrassing," Claire replied calmly, "is assuming someone else will pay without asking." Silence fell. Richard exhaled. "We already told people. Invitations are practically implied." "That wasn't my decision," Claire said. Margaret reached for Claire's hand, but Claire pulled back. "You'll come around," Margaret said softly. "You always do." Claire stood. "Not this time." Later, alone with Ethan, Claire felt the tremor return to her hands. "I'm scared," she admitted. Ethan nodded. "That means you're finally changing something that matters." Claire looked at her phone, now silent. The calm before the storm had arrived, and she knew the next move would decide everything. 3 days later, Claire stood inside an elegant bridal boutique with Hannah, staring at her reflection. The A-line dress was simple, ivory, unadorned. It felt like relief stitched into fabric. "It's you," Hannah said, snapping photos. "Classic. Honest." Claire smiled for the first time in days. The bell above the door chimed. In the mirror, Claire saw Lydia sweep inside, sunglasses perched dramatically on her head, Margaret close behind. "Surprise," Margaret said brightly. Hannah's jaw tightened. Claire inhaled slowly and turned around. "I didn't realize this was a family appointment." Lydia circled her, eyes critical. "It's plain. Nothing memorable." She reached for a champagne flute from a nearby table. "But I guess it suits you." As she gestured, her arm knocked the glass forward. Red liquid splashed across the front of the dress. "Oh no," Lydia gasped, hand to her mouth. "I'm so clumsy." The glass shattered on the floor. The boutique owner rushed over with club soda, but the stain bloomed darker by the second. Margaret sighed sympathetically. "Well, maybe this is a sign. We'll find something that matches Lydia's anniversary gown better." Claire said nothing. She felt something settle inside her, quiet and resolute. 2 hours later, she sat across from Ethan at his office cafeteria, hands shaking. She ruined it on purpose. Ethan's expression hardened. "That's it. No more pretending." "Dad scheduled a walkthrough at Rosewood tomorrow," Claire said. "They expect us to sign." Ethan nodded. "Then tomorrow, we execute Plan B." Claire looked at him, heart pounding. "You're sure?" He squeezed her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything." Rosewood Manor was everything Claire never wanted. Crystal chandeliers, vaulted ceilings, manicured gardens visible through towering windows. "Perfect," Richard said, clapping the venue manager on the back. 200 guests will fit beautifully." 200. Claire echoed. "We agreed on 50. Margaret waved her hand. "We couldn't cut the list. Everyone already knows." Mr. Carter, the venue manager, placed a thick contract on the table. "If we could finalize signatures and the deposit today." "I'll sign first," Richard said, uncapping his pen. Then Claire. "Actually," Claire said, surprising herself, "Ethan and I agreed both our signatures are required." The room stilled. "What are you saying?" Margaret asked sharply. "It's our wedding," Claire said evenly. "We decide together." Lydia snorted. "Since when do you decide anything?" Claire reached into her bag and placed printed documents on the table. "Credit card statements. Unauthorized charges. These were made without my consent," Claire said. "Including a second wedding dress." Margaret's face drained of color. Richard stared at Lydia. "You told me she agreed." "She always pays," Lydia snapped. Claire felt years of silence break free. You're not ruining my wedding like you ruined my education.
Mr. Carter cleared his throat.
Perhaps I should step out.
No need, Claire said, lifting the contract. I'll pay $6,000 for the deposit.
The remaining $57,000 is yours.
Lydia's face twisted. You can't do this. I can, Claire said quietly.
And I am.
Richard hesitated, then signed. Something unreadable crossed his face. That evening, Hannah called with news. Found a small lakeside chapel. Available next weekend. Claire smiled.
That's the one.
The real one.
That night, Claire and Ethan sat cross-legged on their living room floor, surrounded by notes, timelines, and color-coded plans. This feels unreal, Claire said, laughing softly. Rachel arrived with a legal folder. The contract is airtight. They signed. They are responsible.
Mrs. Brooks stopped by with cookies.
Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing.
The night before the wedding, Lydia appeared unannounced. Her eyes narrowed at Claire's newly cropped hair.
The venue needs final payment confirmation, she said.
Claire smiled.
Everything's handled. Tomorrow will be unforgettable.
Something in her tone made Lydia pause. She left without another word. Claire packed a small overnight bag. White sundress. Flats. Marriage license. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Ready. More than ever.
The next morning, Claire sent a carefully staged selfie in a borrowed bridal robe.
Getting started. Running behind but excited. Margaret replied instantly.
Everyone's here. Claire turned off notifications and stepped outside, where sunlight danced across the lake. Her real wedding waited. At noon, beneath a simple arbor by the water, Claire stood surrounded by 20 people who loved her without conditions. Ethan took her hands, steady and warm. As vows were exchanged, no one checked a watch. No one demanded attention. Across town, the illusion unraveled. When Claire said "I do," she felt something lift that she had carried her entire life. The applause at the lakeside chapel faded into laughter and soft conversation as guests gathered for a simple meal on the deck. String lights flickered on as the afternoon shifted toward evening. Claire watched Ethan move easily among their friends, thanking people, laughing, completely present. This was what she had wanted all along. Not spectacle. Not obligation. Just joy without conditions. Hannah slipped her phone from her pocket and grinned. You should hear this. She tapped play on a voicemail. Margaret's voice filled the air, brittle and strained. Hannah, if you know where Claire is, please tell her this isn't funny anymore. The venue needs the remaining payment tonight. Richard had to give them his retirement account information. In the background, Lydia's voice cut through in sharp panic. What do you mean it's my fault? They promised she'd pay. Hannah turned the phone off. Silence followed, then laughter rippled through the group. Ethan lifted his glass. To my wife, he said simply. Claire clinked her glass against his. The knot in her chest finally loosened. She hadn't destroyed anything. She had simply stepped out of a role that was never hers to carry. That night, as they returned to their apartment, Claire slept without dreams for the first time in weeks. No rehearsed conversations. No contingency plans. Just rest. For years, she had mistaken peace for avoidance. Now she understood the difference. Peace was standing still in her own life without flinching. Outside, the city hummed as usual, unaware that something fundamental had shifted inside one small apartment. Claire had crossed a line she could never uncross. And she didn't want to. The doorbell rang the next morning precisely at 10. Claire and Ethan exchanged a knowing glance. Right on time, Ethan murmured. When Claire opened the door, Margaret stood front and center, eyes swollen and red. Richard loomed behind her, jaw clenched. Lydia hovered to the side, her expression torn between anger and disbelief. How could you do this to us? Margaret cried, tears already spilling. After everything we've done for you. Claire stepped aside calmly, gesturing them in. They filed past her into the living room, the familiar scent of Margaret's perfume trailing behind them. Richard didn't sit. You're legally responsible for this bill, Claire. You can't just disappear and leave us ruined. Lydia crossed her arms. I already told people you abandoned your own wedding out of spite. Claire didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the dining table where a leather portfolio sat waiting. Ethan stood beside her, solid and silent. I expected this conversation, Claire said evenly. So I prepared for it.
She opened the portfolio and laid out documents one by one.
What is all this?
Richard snapped. Claire pressed play on her phone. Lydia's recorded voice filled the room.
She'll pay for everything, just like she did for my wedding.
Margaret's face went pale. Richard froze. That recording is legal, Ethan added calmly.
Claire slid bank statements across the table.
Here's proof of the $6,000 I agreed to pay.
And here's the email confirming you're responsible for the rest. Lydia grabbed a paper, her hands shaking. This doesn't prove anything.
Claire met her eyes.
It proves I'm done. Silence stretched across the room, thick and uncomfortable. Richard finally spoke, his voice lower now. Be reasonable. We can't cover $57,000.
I lost $15,000 for your wedding, Claire replied.
This time, I paid $6,000 to be free.
Margaret collapsed onto the couch, sobbing.
Why would you do this to your own family?
This isn't revenge, Claire said.
It's consequence.
Lydia's husband, Mark, who had remained silent near the door, stepped forward. So this is what happened 5 years ago, he asked quietly.
You did this to her too. Lydia looked away.
Richard glared at Margaret. Margaret stared at the floor.
You told me she agreed, Richard said to Lydia.
She always does, Lydia shot back, panic creeping into her voice. Something fractured in the room.
The roles they had played for decades no longer fit.
Claire walked to the door and opened it.
You should go.
Margaret looked up, mascara streaked. Please. We can fix this. I already did, Claire said. They left without another word.
Lydia paused at the threshold, turning back once. For a brief moment, something like respect flickered across her face before it vanished.
The door closed softly. Ethan wrapped his arms around Claire.
She leaned into him, exhausted but steady.
Her phone chimed.
A message from Hannah, on our way with food and champagne.
Claire smiled.
I think we're going to be okay.
She had never been more certain.
A year later, autumn sunlight spilled through the windows of Claire and Ethan's new home. The scent of roasting turkey filled the air as Claire arranged flowers at the center of the table.
1 year,
Ethan said from the doorway, raising his glass.
Claire smiled. 1 year since choosing herself.
1 year without constant negotiation for love.
The doorbell rang.
Through the peephole, Claire saw Lydia standing alone on the porch, shoulders hunched against the cold.
I came to apologize, Lydia said once inside. Her voice lacked its usual edge.
Really apologize?
Claire studied her carefully. Go on.
Mom and Dad had to use their retirement savings, Lydia said. It forced all of us to confront things we avoided.
She hesitated.
Mark threatened divorce unless I started therapy.
Claire nodded slowly. And?
It's hard, Lydia admitted. But necessary. The front door opened as Hannah and Rachel arrived, followed by Ethan's parents. Laughter filled the house, warm and effortless. Later, as they cleared dishes together, Lydia spoke quietly. You're welcome in my life as my sister, Claire said, not as someone who sacrifices herself for me.
Lydia nodded.
I understand. For the first time, Claire believed her. After everyone left, Ethan handed Claire a small, silver-wrapped box. Inside was a framed receipt, $6,000, venue deposit. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, Best investment we ever made in our freedom.
Claire laughed softly.
She traced the glass with her finger, feeling no bitterness, only clarity.
Some lessons were expensive. This one was worth every penny.
In the weeks that followed the confrontation, silence settled between Claire and her parents.
It wasn't dramatic. No long emails. No surprise visits. Just absence.
For the first time, Claire didn't rush to fill it. She let the quiet exist without apology. She focused instead on ordinary things, morning walks with Ethan, unpacking boxes in their new home, learning how peaceful evenings could feel when no one was demanding anything from her. At work, her focus sharpened. Without the constant emotional drain, she noticed she was thinking more clearly, speaking more confidently in meetings.
Her manager commented on it one afternoon. You seem lighter, he said casually.
Claire smiled, surprised by how true it felt. One evening, as she and Ethan assembled a bookshelf, Claire paused mid-screw. Do you ever feel guilty? She asked, even when you know you did the right thing.
Ethan leaned back against the wall. Guilt is just a habit, he said.
It fades when you stop feeding it.
Claire nodded slowly.
She realized how much of her life had been shaped by reflexive guilt, trained into her so early it felt like instinct.
Now, she was unlearning it piece by piece.
The wedding photos arrived in the mail that week. She spread them across the table, smiling at the unguarded joy on her own face.
No forced poses. No audience to impress. Just truth.
She placed one photo in a frame and set it on her desk.
A reminder.
This was what choosing herself looked like. The first call from Margaret came 6 weeks later.
Claire watched the phone ring until it stopped. There was no rush anymore.
No obligation to respond immediately. When Claire finally returned the call that evening, Margaret's voice sounded smaller than she remembered.
I wanted to check in, she said cautiously.
See how you're doing.
I'm doing well, Claire replied honestly. A pause followed.
Your father and we're adjusting, Margaret said. Things were harder than we expected. Claire heard the unspoken request beneath the words.
Sympathy. Reassurance. Permission to be absolved.
I hope you're getting support, Claire said gently. That's important.
Margaret sighed.
Your sister's in therapy now.
I know, Claire replied. Another pause.
Would you be open to lunch sometime?
Claire considered the question carefully. Not yet, she said.
But maybe in the future.
Margaret didn't argue.
I understand, she said quietly, and for the first time, Claire believed she meant it. When the call ended, Claire didn't feel shaken.
She felt steady. The conversation hadn't reopened old wounds.
It had simply confirmed something she already knew.
Distance had given her clarity. That night, she and Ethan planned a small weekend trip. No family.
No explanations.
Just them.
Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came new traditions. Claire hosted a small holiday dinner for friends who had become family: Hannah, Rachel, Mrs. Brooks, and a handful of others who showed up with laughter and no expectations.
Mrs. Brooks raised her glass. To chosen family, she said warmly.
Claire felt a swell of gratitude she hadn't known was possible. After dinner, Hannah pulled Claire aside. You know, she said, you've changed.
Claire smiled.
I hope so. It's not just confidence, Hannah continued. It's presence. You don't disappear anymore. The comment stayed with Claire. She thought about all the times she had shrunk herself to keep others comfortable. How often she had mistaken silence for kindness. Later that night, Claire wrote in a journal she had started after the wedding. She didn't write about her parents or Lydia. She wrote about boundaries she wanted to keep, values she wanted to protect, and the kind of woman she was becoming. She volunteered at a community center a few months later, mentoring young women navigating family pressure and financial control. She didn't preach. She listened. When asked for advice, she kept it simple. You're allowed to choose yourself, she told them. Each time she said it, the truth settled deeper inside her. Spring arrived quietly. One afternoon, Claire received an email from Lydia.
No drama. No accusations. Just a short message. Therapy is harder than I expected. I'm starting to see things differently. I wanted you to know. Claire read it twice. She didn't respond immediately.
She sat with it, noticing what she felt, and what she didn't.
There was no rush of guilt. No pull to fix or reassure. Only cautious openness.
When she replied, her message was brief.
I hope it helps you. I'm open to rebuilding slowly. Lydia responded with a simple thank you. That was enough. Claire shared the exchange with Ethan that evening. He nodded.
Progress doesn't have to be dramatic, he said.
I know, Claire replied.
That's what makes it real. Later, they walked through their neighborhood, hands brushing as they talked about future plans, travel, career goals, maybe children someday. These conversations felt expansive, not burdened by invisible obligations.
Claire realized something then.
Her life was no longer a reaction to someone else's needs.
It was moving forward on its own terms. And that changed everything.
On the anniversary of the confrontation at Rosewood Manor, Claire stood in their living room, looking at the framed wedding photo on the wall. She remembered the fear she had felt that day, the tremor in her hands, the uncertainty.
She also remembered the moment she spoke anyway.
Courage, she understood now, wasn't the absence of fear.
It was refusing to let fear decide.
Ethan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. You okay?
Yes, Claire said. And she meant it fully.
Her phone buzzed with a message from one of the young women she mentored.
I told my parents no today. It was terrifying. But I did it. Claire smiled and typed back. I'm proud of you. She set the phone down and leaned into Ethan. The house felt solid. Safe. Earned.
Claire didn't know what the future would bring with her family. Reconciliation, distance, something in between. It would unfold in its own time. What she knew was this: she would never again confuse sacrifice with love. Late one evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Claire sat alone at the dining table reviewing paperwork for the scholarship fund she and Ethan had quietly set up. It wasn't large, but it was intentional. Money that once would have been siphoned away through guilt and obligation now had direction. Purpose. She paused when she noticed the return address on an envelope resting among the documents. Her parents' handwriting. She didn't open it immediately. She made tea first. She had learned not to rush emotional moments anymore. Inside was a short letter. No dramatics. No accusations. Richard wrote that they had sold the golf club membership and downsized their lifestyle. Margaret added a few lines at the bottom, acknowledging, without defensiveness, that they had relied too heavily on Claire's sense of responsibility for far too long. There was no request for forgiveness. No plea to resume old roles. Just acknowledgement. Claire set the letter down and felt something close to peace settle in her chest. Not reconciliation. Not closure in the dramatic sense. But acceptance. She understood now that accountability didn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it arrived quietly, after consequences had done their work. When Ethan came home, she handed him the letter. He read it, then looked up. "How do you feel?" Claire considered the question carefully. "Relieved," she said. "And finished." Finished didn't mean hardened. It meant complete. Spring returned, bright and unapologetic. Claire's days filled with work she enjoyed, friendships that felt mutual, and evenings that belonged entirely to her and Ethan. They hosted dinners without anxiety, planned trips without family negotiations, and laughed easily in ways that once felt foreign. One afternoon, Lydia stopped by briefly to drop off a box of old childhood photos she had found while clearing out their parents' attic. "You might want these," she said. "I didn't." Claire thanked her. They stood in the doorway for a moment, neither rushing, neither lingering. "I'm still figuring things out," Lydia admitted quietly. "I know," Claire replied. "That's your work." There was no bitterness in the exchange. No triumph. Just clarity. They hugged briefly, carefully, like two people learning a new shape to an old relationship. Later, Claire sorted through the photos alone. She noticed something she had never seen before. Even as a child, she had often stood slightly apart, observant, accommodating, already learning how to manage others' emotions. She placed the photos back in the box and slid it onto a shelf. The past no longer needed examination. She had learned what she needed from it. That evening, Ethan asked, "If you could say one thing to the woman you were a year ago, what would it be?" Claire smiled softly. "You're not selfish. You're just done being used." The words felt final. True. Enough. On a quiet Sunday morning, Claire and Ethan sat on their porch watching the neighborhood wake up. Birds moved between trees. Someone laughed down the block. Ordinary life unfolded, steady and unremarkable in the best way. Claire thought back to the moment in the hallway. The laughter behind the door, the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides. That version of her had believed endurance was love and silence was strength. She knew better now. Strength was choosing honesty over harmony. Love was mutual, not transactional. And freedom was not abandonment, it was self-respect in action. Claire leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, breathing easily. No future confrontation loomed. No debt remained, financial or emotional. The cost had been paid, the lesson learned, the chapter closed. Some people never escape the roles assigned to them in childhood. Claire had. Not with cruelty. Not with spectacle. But with resolve, patience, and a willingness to walk away when staying meant losing herself. Inside the house, sunlight caught the framed wedding photo on the wall. Two people laughing by a lake. No audience. No performance. Claire smiled, content in the quiet certainty of it. She had not lost her family. She had found herself. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from today. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them.